5 books in 5 days. Welcome back, y'all. Welcome back. Today, I want to talk about 5 books that I read in 5 days. Now, here's a caveat. If you're anything like me, you have an interest in something and then decide you want to know more about it. So then you pick up 2, 3, 4, 5 books around it, that topic. And that's what happened to me. I was very interested in learning a little bit more about like mental health and specifically the schizophrenias. And so that's what this video is about. The first book I want to talk about is The Collected Schizophrenias Essays by Esme, Weijun, Wang. And this is a first-hand account of not a student. Well, she started off a student. She was a student at Yale. She was a student at Stanford as well. But it starts off with, it's a first-hand account of her life, her becoming diagnosed, her opinion on diagnoses in general. You know, some people think that it's a limited box that you're putting yourself in. But she found comfort in her diagnosis. But she was originally diagnosed as bipolar disorder. And then over like 18 years, they finally added to her diagnosis and said she had schizoaffective disorder as well. And so it just talks about what that looks like, what psychotic breaks look like, the stigma versus, what it is, reality versus myths. Talks about the urge and the yearning for normalcy, even when you're like in a depressive mode or a psychotic break or something like that. It actually does a really good job at breaking down the differences between psychosis, psychotic breaks, depressives, a depressive state, a manic state. It does a really good job at really like showcasing what it is. Another thing that I enjoyed from this book, like I said, it's a first-hand account of her journey. She really talks about how people are perceived, like how she's perceived, like, so when she's introducing herself, for the longest, she would like to lead with all of her accomplishments. Again, like chasing that sense and that need for normalcy. She would like to lead with her accomplishments. Like, yeah, I'm a fashion blogger. I work for this company. I used to write for this magazine. I went to Stanford. I went to Yale. I do this. I do that. I'm married. I have a small business because, she thought that would like say, hey, I'm normal. And then she'd say, yeah, I got schizoaffective disorder like that. But yeah, I thought this book was interesting. It was good. Like, it's vulnerable. You get to see it from her point of view. She talks about, again, the process of leading up to her diagnosis, how she was treated during college with that diagnosis, the genetic portion of being diagnosed, the fact that they're trying to move from, like, psychiatry in general is trying to move from more of a soft science, not soft, but more to a hard science side of things where they can do brain scans, where they can actually draw your blood and see XYZ. So yeah, it was interesting. Her mom was a trip. What's new? I thought it was really good. So that's the book that I read today. And this video, let me clarify, is 5 books in 5 days. Each book I read 1 book a day, but not back to back. So this book I read in a day. The next book I'll be back. I read that in a day, but it won't be my tomorrow, but it'll be y'all tomorrow in the video. See you in a few. Okay, this is going to be a quick one. When the Sun Bursts, The Enigma of Schizophrenia by Christopher Bollas. This book was written by a psychoanalyst, and he has over 40 years of experience. And this is written using research and his years of experience with his patients, what he's been told. So firsthand accounts from his friends, his mentors, his colleagues, and things like that. And it's just a really refreshing look if you want the perspective of the psychiatrist or the psychoanalyst working with patients. So as the first book kind of talked about a firsthand account of somebody being diagnosed with and living with schizoaffective disorder, this talks about working directly with people who have been diagnosed with schizophrenia or any of these schizophrenias. So It's definitely a different take. I did like it a little bit less than the collected Schizophrenias essays, but it's still good. I still learned a lot from this. I still got a lot of information that I didn't know. For example, I could see when reading this why it would be beneficial, yes, to read firsthand accounts, but to also read about it from a like professional standpoint, because like I said, this is kind of talking about working directly with that population, but it does bring like it brings a different perspective, because when you're reading firsthand accounts, you feel like deeply connected to the story. But while reading this, I felt, wait, okay, let me go back. When you're reading firsthand accounts, while you do feel deeply connected to the story, I can't help but feel like, man, I feel like they're like not being treated right in, when they go into these like hospitals or when they go and sit on these couches. I just feel like they're not treated like they should be. They don't have the respect that they need to get in those times. They're not believed, because a lot of what was talked about in the collected Schizophrenias, the last book that I talked about, was how nobody believes you. The only time they believe you is when you say, that buzzword that they only believe you when you say one thing. Other than that, they don't really believe anything else. So kind of seeing the other side of like somebody sitting in that chair and listening to you talk about it, what's going through their mind during the time. I just feel like it was good to kind of put those two pieces of the puzzle together. So When the Sun Bursts was really good. It was really good. Again, written from a psychoanalyst perspective of somebody in the profession, but you do get like a different feel. Like you can kind of, again, both are necessary. I think for me, somebody who is really trying to understand more about schizophrenia. So yeah, that's book 2. The next book that we have is Shrinks, The Untold Story of Psychiatry by Jeffrey A. Lieberman. This book right here, it's different than the other books, because this is pretty much written in defense of psychiatry as a practice, as a field, as an industry. And it talks about schizophrenia, but not solely schizophrenia. So it talks about, again, psychiatry as a field overall. It is broken up into 3 parts. One is the history of diagnosis, the history of treatment, and then psychiatry reborn. What I like about this book is it really points out that psychiatry has had a dubious past. Okay, we're talking medically induced comas. We're talking about hiding people away in attics. We're talking about shock therapy to a crazy degree. We're talking about lobotomies. We're talking about just out, off the wall stuff. A lot of quacks that used psychiatry in like this field to just do stuff off the wall. Okay, they were saying they could smell schizophrenia. They were saying that they could like sense certain things just based on eye contact. So many different things, but it points out that just like any other field in medicine, it did have a hard past, and you can go back and trace any medical roots or any like medical field roots to a wild past. Okay, but it did highlight, it highlighted those things, but then it also talked about the path for what has happened, what has changed, how it's more medically sound, how psychiatry has took its rightful place in the medical field. It also talks about a lot of the history of psychiatry. Like I said, it is broken up into 3 parts, like the history of the diagnosis, the treatment, and then psychiatry rebirth. I like that it talked about a lot of like the roots of psychiatry, because I mean, we know Freud and we kind of know like, what his research was, what his beliefs were, what his stances were. But it's interesting to see the other founders of different parts of psychiatry as well, not just psychoanalysts. Yeah, talked about a lot of that. Some of the people that he initially recruited in, that he then, wanted to separate themselves from because they didn't necessarily agree with him. Talked about their actual impact, how they were brilliant minds, but also some of their downfalls too. a lot of psychiatrists and innovators and pioneers I never heard of. So that was pretty cool to read. But yeah, I actually really like this. This was super informative. And it really talked about like psychiatry and its redemption story, okay? And it's written by the former president of the American Psychiatric Association. So I just felt like it was well researched, it rich in history. It had a lot going for it. I thoroughly enjoyed this. If y'all can hear that, y'all, that's the trash truck outside. But anyways, thoroughly enjoyed this. And at this point, we just have two more, so be back. No One Cares About Crazy People by Ron Powers. This book is part memoir, part biography, part history, part current affairs. So it's a blend of all of them. It's a personal narrative and then there's a historical narrative. It's written by a journalist whose two sons were both affected and diagnosed with schizophrenia. And he just goes through the journey of what it's like from a parent's point of view, as well as an advocate in some kind of, current affair type situations. This book really brought up the idea and the question of, which was also brought up in, it was also brought up in the schizophrenia essays, the idea of choice and mandatory medications and mandatory commitments and things like that, mandatory hospitalization. It really brought up the choice of what is choice? Like, you have the right to choose. However, what if your mind itself is a prison? Is that really your choice? Like, if you can't trust your mind, is it your choice? If you told someone else that they could choose for you, but then you go back and say no, but you're not in the same mind frame that you were in when you first told them, is that your choice? So it really brings up the idea of voluntary and involuntary commitments, hospitalizations, prescriptions, medications, and things like that. Again, this is the only book so far that I've read from a parent's perspective. I have one more book left that I'm going to read tomorrow or the next day. This is from a parent's perspective. And because of that, first of all, you can tell, but because of that, you kind of have a different angle, okay? You can tell that he's not in the psychiatry field at all, but it is researched. But some of his like takes and some of the things that he wanted to highlight, they came across a little hard. It wasn't really like maybe he didn't go about it like the accepted way to like discuss certain things and stuff like that. But it was vulnerable. And again, it's his perspective. It is like a personal narrative intertwined with the social things and the historical things. And this book essentially is a call to action to do something. He and his wife raised two sons who were both affected by schizophrenia, and their families were affected too. So this book also made me think about, yes, the person is struggling with that mental illness. They're not in a silo. They are struggling. That's a separate struggle that you can't understand fully unless you're that person. However, it's not in a silo. There's a web. So you do have other people affected by mental illness indirectly. And that's kind of what this book highlighted for me. So yeah, while I did enjoy the personal narrative of this story, at times it did seem a little disjointed. But still really, really enjoyed it. There's only one more book left. One more book left. So I'm gonna see y'all in a little while. Your couple seconds, my couple days. Book number 5, the last book, is The Censor Cannot Hold: My Journey into Madness by Elyn Sachs. This book was interesting. It, again, is a firsthand account. It's a memoir written from a law professor. It talks about her initial diagnosis. It talks about life before it, life after it, life throughout it. Talks about like her childhood and how some of these things kind of popped up early on in her life and how she kind of suppressed them. And just like her initial aversion to and like refusal to medicate, to get any kind of treatment, to seek help, to open up. And she really believed at first that she can just like fight this through sheer willpower. And so it talks about like you really get a good idea at her mental landscape at the time. You get a good idea of like her relationships with other people, like her mama, her daddy, brothers, how those changed over time, her colleagues and stuff like that. You really get to see all parts of what she was thinking throughout this whole thing. And another thing that really popped up to me in this book was the idea about respect and autonomy. Like so much of what she was saying when she was dealing with like people, mental health professionals and people in the hospitals and people at school and at her like student health center and stuff like that was this idea of being respected, being treated like no matter like your mental illness, being treated like somebody who is deserving of respect and who has like bodily autonomy. So I thought that was good. I'm glad that I ended on this note. This book was actually referenced in the first book that I reviewed, the collected Schizophrenias, that collected essays book by Esme. So yeah, I thought it was good. You know, every few years, I feel like I go through this journey where there's like a mental health thing, something mental health related that I would like want to know more about. And this time it just so happened to be schizophrenia. And it's always so eye opening and like interesting in the fact of like, you just don't know. And just to kind of get firsthand accounts and secondary accounts and just like a broad range of voices talking to you about this one topic. I just feel like this was like a super deep, in-depth TED talk, and I was sitting there watching the whole thing. That's what it felt like. But yeah, that's it. Thank y'all for listening to me talk about the collected schizophrenias and mental health awareness. This book, Evelyn Sachs, is actually a mental health advocate. Like I said, she's a law professor. She is a part of like the APA Association, American Psychiatric Association, and a lot of things. She really is like a pronounced voice in this space. So that's it, y'all. Thank y'all for watching. I appreciate it. Just be one common theme that I've seen throughout every one of these books is the importance of respecting others, the importance of knowing like we're all striving for our version of normalcy and it looks different from other people's, you know, and reach out if you need help, but also give grace to other people who are dealing with stuff. Like everybody deals with stuff on their own. People don't know how certain things happen. They don't know what to attribute it to. And you can just get a bad hand sometimes. So that's it, y'all. Thanks for watching. And I'm going to see y'all on the next one.